Many people consider Henri IV as one of the greatest kings of France. He received the nicknames such as the Good King Henri or Henri the Great. He ended the long wars of religion. Then, how come this good king ended up being stabbed to death in the middle of Paris traffic? In 1600, Henri IV married Marie de Medicis, his second wife. His new wife had done her duty almost immediately. Marie was pregnant almost as soon as they got married, and in 1601, she gave birth to a son. Henri finally had a legitimate heir now. All of France rejoiced. The whole court nearly fainted with relief. It had been an eternity since France had seen a birth of a dauphin. Going back to Henri's predecessors, Henri II and Catherine de Medicis produced sons in abundance, but they were a sickly lot. François II died young. Charles IX and Henri III were his younger brothers, so they were not born as the heirs, and none of those kings left any children. Then Henri IV himself took the throne, but he had no child with his first wife, Marguerite de Valois, after many years of marriage. So, since the birth of François II back in 1544, the French court had not celebrated the birth of an heir to the crown. The boy was named Louis. Marie thought this child would secure her place. Queen, the mother of the dauphin, her position was unassailable. But was it? Only a few weeks after the birth of Dauphin Louis, Henri's official mistress, Henriette d'Entragues, gave birth as well. Another boy, Gaston Henri. The king was overjoyed, more so, some said, than with little Louis. He ordered feasts, he praised the child's looks. He went so far as to claim the illegitimate son Gaston Henri was handsomer than the Dauphin Louis. Now imagine Marie's feelings. From the very start, she found her husband dismissive, even insulting. But what really infuriated her most was his behavior toward Henriette. Henri had the gall to bring Henriette to meet Marie as soon as Marie arrived at Louvre. Protocol demanded Henriette curtsy before the queen. Instead, she gave a slight nod as if acknowledging a passing waiter. Even Henri was embarrassed at this, pushed her head down with his own royal hand. But still, Henri did nothing to reprimand her. And things got even worse from there. Henriette mocked Marie openly, called her a fat banker. She was indeed the daughter of Florentine bankers, but one does not say these things to a queen's face. Marie got so angry she even wept. Henriette then went about proclaiming that her son Gaston Henri was the legitimate heir and Louis was the bastard. Henri, instead of cutting her off, merely muttered that she should be more discreet, while continuing to soothe Henriette's tempers. And naturally, Marie was not amused in the least. But why was Henriette acting this way? What gave her the courage to oppose the queen? And, even more importantly, why was Henri permitting this to go on? It was obviously inappropriate, but Henri had his reasons. When his previous official mistress, Gabrielle d'Estrées, died suddenly, Henri was in deep despair. And into this void came Henriette. She comforted him, and then managed to get a written promise out of him that he would marry her and that he would make her children his heirs. But then Henri promptly broke this promise and married Marie, a political match arranged with the swiftness and precision of a banker's transaction. To Henriette, Marie was the interloper that came between Henri and herself. But to Marie, Henriette was a mistress who does not know her place before the queen. And the result? Henri found himself trapped between the two women. Each had reasons to be angry, and both with tempers that were matched only by their lofty prides. And Henri, rather than trying to deal with the problem, he decided to hide from both of them and sought relief in his usual way, from other women, that is. which of course only made Henriette and Marie even more enraged. Yet, in his heart, he seemed to have regarded Henriette as his true wife. He even kept her residence near the Louvre, spending most nights with her. But then, what about Marie? In Henri's view, she was useful for one thing: producing heirs. It was much the same role Catherine de Medicis had once played. Catherine's husband Henri II had his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, manage the household as if she were the queen. Catherine endured this with patience because she had little choice. But Marie was not the enduring type. She would not play the doormat. She had wealth, breeding, and the pride of Florence. So she fought. She demanded Henri punish Henriette, demanded respect, demanded control of her dowry. "Why can I not use my own money?" she asked. "Reasonable enough." But Henri was unmoved. He ignored all her demands, and the more she resisted, the colder he grew. By 1603, only 3 years into the marriage, the husband and wife had reached a complete rupture, and the blame was squarely at Henri's door. Marie did receive poor treatment. Henri, as king, should have imposed order. Instead, he let his mistress and queen tear at each other while he himself dabbled elsewhere. The royal household became a circus without a ringmaster. It was chaos, and it was his fault. So why, one might ask, did Henri grow so cold toward Marie? He was, after all, quite satisfied with her when she first came. There might be several reasons, but the simplest answer might be that they were just ill-matched. Henri found her proud, chilly, and constantly interfering. She hovered, she nagged, she pressed, and the more she pressed, the more he recoiled. Spouses of the 21st century might recognize the pattern, though in those days, divorce was not on the menu. Then there was politics. For Henri, his greatest enemy was Spain and the House of Habsburg. Spain had swallowed his native Navarre. Spain had bled him through the endless wars. Felipe II even tried to displace him from the French line of succession, backing another candidate during the war. So for Henri, Felipe II had been the devil himself. So his policy was simple: oppose the Habsburgs at every turn. Marie, however, was a Habsburg relative herself. Inevitably, her sympathies leaned that way. So when she spoke up for the imperial side, Henri snapped. "The queen must not meddle in affairs of states," he told her. A frosty dismissal, and Marie did not take this well. Other irritations piled on. Chief among them was one Leonora Galigai, Marie's companion since childhood, formerly known as Leonora Dori. Henri disliked her intensely. To his eyes, Galigai was a gloomy-faced woman that hovered in the background. Worse, she whispered in Marie's ear. Henri would often settle a matter with his queen, only to find her changing her tune the very next day, after talking to Galigai, he suspected. Leonora then married a young man, Concino Concini, another Italian hanger-on from Marie's entourage. Concini was too ambitious, too acquisitive, and altogether unappealing to Henri. Together, Galigai and Concini prospered behind Marie, acquiring lands and dipping their fingers into profitable ventures. To Henri, they were parasitic schemers who are using the queen as cover. He could not stand them, but Marie continued to shield them. In short, he didn't like her personality, her family, nor her friends. A disastrous trinity. So Henri's marriage ended up being an utter chaos. He was faithful to no woman and earned their hatred in return. His household was a storm, but France under him was calm and growing strong. Chaos in bed, order in the kingdom. Much of the credit goes to his minister, Maximilien de Béthune, Duc de Sully. Henri trusted him from youth and gave him wide powers. Sully was a Protestant, which made many suspicious, but his results silenced opposition. First, agriculture. The war had left the land wasted. Sully replanted trees, dug canals, drained swamps. He liked to say that farming was the foundation of wealth. He even distributed chicken to peasant households. Soon it was said every Frenchman could eat chicken once a week. A modest goal by modern standards. Today we complain if the supermarket is out of organic, free-range, non-GMO fed chicken breasts. But in 1600, it was a small revolution. Sully also reformed the finances. He cut waste, filled the treasury, and spent on roads and bridges. He strengthened the army, built fortresses, and made France secure. He even oversaw the beginnings of colonial expansion. Quebec was founded in his time, though he generally preferred to strengthen the home front rather than fling money at distant ventures. So, thanks to Sully, France recovered from the civil wars. Prosperity returned. Public opinion, once wary of Henri, shifted in his favor. But not everyone was happy. There are always malcontents. They complained that Henri quarreled with Rome and that he defied Catholic tradition, that he opposed the Habsburgs too boldly. For his critics, no success could excuse a king who did not follow the tradition. And among those malcontents was one François Ravaillac. He came from a respectable middle-class Catholic family, though his father was a violent man who caused endless trouble. From him, young Ravaillac inherited a hot temper. He quarreled everywhere he went, lost jobs, made enemies, and collected grievances. At some point, he slipped into religious extremism. He claimed visions. God, he said, had ordered him to convert all the Huguenots in France back to Catholicism. And to achieve this, he resolved to see the king himself. He marched to Paris, pestering everyone he could, insisting on an audience. Naturally, he was refused. Henri had many vices, but extremism on either side was not one of them. While lingering in Paris, Ravaillac heard rumors. Henri was preparing to invade the Spanish Netherlands. In fact, it was true. A dispute over a territory had brought France and Spain to the brink of war. Henri, now with money, soldiers, and confidence, was ready to strike at his lifelong foe, the Habsburgs. But Ravaillac's interpretation was different. For him, this campaign was nothing less than an attack on the Pope himself, because Spain was on Pope's side. He figured Henri had finally revealed himself as a heretic that he always was. And so, May the 14th, 1610, the stage was set. Henri was riding through Paris, near the marketplace south of Louvre. He was on his way to visit Sully, who was ill. The streets were jammed. On one side, a cart full of wine barrels had halted. On the other side, a hay wagon blocked the way. The royal carriage slowed. Guards stepped down to clear a path. And that was the moment. Ravaillac rushed forward, thrusting a knife into the king's chest. It was swift, brutal, and final. Henri IV, who had ended the wars of religion and rebuilt France, died not in battle, but stabbed in the street by a deranged fanatic. Ravaillac was arrested on the spot. He was tortured with the full imagination of the age, but he insisted that he acted alone. He never changed his story, and in the end, he was executed by being pulled apart by 4 horses, each tied to his limbs. But even in agony, he shouted that his deed was just, and that God had commanded it, and that heaven awaited him. He named no accomplices, and none was ever proven. But still, suspicion hung heavy. How had he known of the king's route and schedule? Such details were closely guarded. It seemed impossible without help from the inside the court. The traffic jam itself was also strange. 2 heavy carts, one with wine barrels, the other with hay, had blocked the narrow street at the precise moment the royal carriage arrived. Coincidence? Or orchestration? Naturally, eyes turned to possible conspirators. and among those suspected were the two women closest to Henri. First, Henriette d'Entragues. She had been linked to plots against the king in the past. She hated Henri. She wanted Marie cast aside. And when it didn't work, she dreamt up putting her own son, Gaston Henri, on the throne. She schemed tirelessly. At times, her plots were uncovered, yet Henri always forgave her. Weakness to women being one of his few consistent qualities. Later research had even shown that one of her associates had contact with Ravaillac. It is, at the very least, suspicious. But was Henriette truly behind the knife? Some doubted, because she ended up gaining nothing from Henri's death. She was, after all, the mistress. Her son was not the Dauphin. Henriette lost her influence and her position almost immediately. She was dismissed from the court by the new regent, Marie. She was crushed. So perhaps she was no mastermind, just a bitter woman with sharp tongue. On the other hand, there was one person who gained everything by Henri's death, and that was Marie. When the king died, the Parlement of Paris immediately recognized the 8-year-old Louis as the next king, Louis XIII, with Marie as regent. And as history often shows, the one who gains everything from a death is the first to be suspected. And unlike Henriette d'Entragues, who had no real faction behind her, Marie did. In her background loomed the Habsburgs. Henri had been preparing for open war against Spain. And what was the first thing Marie did once she became regent? She offered Spain concessions and signed peace treaty. So perhaps Marie's Habsburg relatives played a hand in it, and Marie simply turned a blind eye? But again, there was no evidence, just circumstances. Once she became regent, Marie also stripped Henri's loyal minister Sully of all power. In his place, she elevated Concini, the Italian adventurer married to her confidant, Leonora Galigai. One can imagine Henri IV spinning in his grave. And so ended the story of Henri IV, the first Bourbon king of France. And with his death, his widow, Marie, became the second Medici woman to rule France as regent. Her reign was again very different from her predecessor Catherine's, yet no less dramatic. But that is a story for another episode. So please like and subscribe to continue receiving more stories from history. And check out our playlist for stories from other countries and periods. It really helps a small channel like us